There's a moment when everything shifts, not because you shouted, not because you called them out, but because you went quiet and saw them clearly. No more illusions, no more excuses, no more cycles of false hope. That's when the narcissist feels it you've woken up. You're no longer under their control, and that terrifies them more than any accusation ever could. Because when you see through them, you become the mirror they've spent their entire life avoiding. But make no mistake, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of their unraveling, and their reaction, it's intense. It's calculated. It's layered with manipulation. Because losing control over you, the narrative and the image they carefully crafted is their worst nightmare. In this video, we're diving deep into the storm behind their silence, exploring why they lash out, smear you, pretend to change, or simply vanish. And more importantly, how you can stay free without falling back into their trap. If you're on a healing journey or simply trying to make sense of the chaos, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end. Because today might just be the day you reclaim your mind and finally break the cycle for good. Do you know what really happens when a narcissist realizes you've seen through them? They don't fall apart the way you might hope. They don't feel remorse. They don't sit down, admit their faults, and cry for forgiveness. No. Their first reaction isn't guilt, it's alarm. A deep internal panic where everything they've worked to hide suddenly feels exposed. For most people, being seen clearly flaws and all can be a chance to grow. But for a narcissist, it's an identity crisis. Because their sense of self wasn't built on truth, it was built on control. And when you see through them, when you no longer believe their stories or respond to their tactics, you've just cut off the emotional fuel they depend on to survive. At that moment, you're no longer a partner. You're a threat, a rebel, a living reminder of the truth they can't control. And that truth, just by existing, has the power to unravel the carefully constructed illusion they live inside. Their first response is often rage, but it's not ordinary anger. It's a desperate attempt to regain control. They might insult you, belittle you, even try to scare you all to make you doubt yourself and fall back into your old role. But when anger doesn't work, they pivot. They become the victim. I'm only like this because you hurt me. No one understands me like you do. I need you. And if that still doesn't bring you back, they'll reach for something more dangerous, your deepest vulnerabilities. They remember everything. The fears you shared, the wounds you trusted them with, and they will weaponize those truths against you. Not by accident, but with precision. Because they know exactly where to push to make you falter. They'll make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. If you go silent, they'll say you're cruel. If you pull away, they'll call you cold. If you protect yourself, they'll call you selfish. And in that moment, you may begin to doubt. Am I being too harsh? Am I the problem? That's the most dangerous place to be. Because if you believe that even for a second you're walking back into the very cage you just escaped. But if you recognize that their escalation isn't proof that you're wrong, but that they're losing control, you'll begin to hold your ground. That's when you start reclaiming your power. Here's the truth: the narcissist isn't afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing their control over you. They fear your independence. They fear your silence. They fear you seeing who they really are and not reacting. Because when you no longer react, it means they've lost their emotional supply, the very thing they relied on to feel important, relevant, superior. You might notice them suddenly becoming warm, unusually attentive. Someone who once ignored you is now texting constantly, calling, apologizing, sending gifts. They'll say they've seen the light, that they want to change, that they can't live without you. But make no mistake, this is not transformation. It's panic, dressed up as affection. They're not changing because they understand what they did wrong. They're changing because they're terrified of losing control. And if that doesn't work, they'll pivot to more extreme tactics. Threats of abandonment, character assassination, even emotional blackmail, like threatening self-harm. These reactions aren't about love, they're survival responses to losing their grip on your mind. One of the most dangerous phases in this cycle is what psychology calls the extinction burst, the moment when manipulation no longer works, and the manipulator lashes out harder, more chaotically, trying one last time to trigger the old reaction. It might look like sudden marriage proposals, passionate declarations of love, promises to go to therapy, or terrifying ultimatums. If you leave me, I'll end it all. These moments are not random. They're crafted to pierce your empathy, to stir up old emotional attachments, to make you question your decision to leave. And this right here is the most fragile place in your journey, because even a flicker of guilt can pull you back into a cycle you've worked so hard to escape. You'll find yourself once again at the mercy of gaslighting, manipulation, hollow affection, and heartbreak. Don't be fooled by their extremes. A person who only changes when they're afraid of losing you was never truly committed to change in the first place. Because real transformation doesn't come from fear, it comes from accountability. And accountability is something a narcissist is structurally incapable of accepting. For them, shame feels like annihilation. When you truly see this, you stop asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and start telling yourself, "I don't need to understand them anymore. I need to understand myself." You begin to realize that no matter what they say, promise, cry, or threaten, you're no longer available to respond. You're no longer reacting. And that is true freedom. From their point of view, you're no longer the partner the other half, or the one they love. You're now a threat, a witness to the one thing they've been hiding even from themselves, the truth, and the truth cannot be controlled. To a narcissist, your emotional reactions used to be the barometer of their power. Every time you broke down, they felt impactful. Every time you got angry, they felt in control. But when you stop reacting, you're no longer playing the role of their ideal victim. And that dismantles the entire structure they've used to dominate you. At this point, they become more dangerous, not physically necessarily, but psychologically strategic. They begin to play the long game. No more outbursts or desperate begging. Instead, they move into silence, planning a new form of psychological disruption. They might disappear for weeks, then suddenly resurface as if nothing ever happened. No apology, no accountability, just a casual, "I miss you," or "we should talk," or "things shouldn't have ended this way." It's not remorse. It's a test to see if the system still works, to see if your resolve has softened. If you don't respond, they may start circling around you, reaching out to mutual friends, family, even your children, planting seeds of doubt, rewriting the narrative, painting themselves as the abandoned one. Not because they miss you, but because they're trying to destabilize your reality. They know if they can't reach you directly, they can manipulate the environment around you, make you question what's real, question yourself, question your clarity. And if you ever truly loved them, if you shared your heart, your story, your soul, this will hurt deeply. Not because you want them back, but because some part of you believed that at the very least they would respect what you once shared. But then you learn the most painful truth to them. The relationship was never about connection. It was about control. And when that control is gone, they don't grieve the loss of you. They grieve the loss of their leverage. But here's the shift. If you stay grounded in that quiet strength, if you maintain distance, if you refuse to engage, to fix, to explain, they begin to panic for real. Because now you're not the same version of yourself they once knew. You've become awake, no longer vulnerable to the same hooks and traps. And when they realize there's nothing left to manipulate, no power, no access, no angle, they resort to the one thing they fear the most, disappearing. Not because they've grown, but because your truth has outgrown their control. When the narcissist disappears, it may feel like the end. But in reality, it's just the beginning of something far more important. No more texts that shake your peace. No more hollow apologies wrapped in false hope. No more psychological games, guilt trips, or fake remorse. For the first time in what feels like forever, the space around you is silent. And then in that silence, another kind of storm begins inside you. You begin to face the things you once avoided, the emptiness, the disorientation, the memories of being belittled, manipulated, abandoned. The old questions return. Was I too harsh? Am I overreacting? Did they ever really love me? But this isn't weakness. This is the awakening. Because when you're no longer consumed with reacting to their chaos, you start to hear your own voice again, the one that's been buried beneath fear, misplaced compassion, and the desperate need to be loved at any cost. Now you begin to relearn the most basic, yet most sacred things: how to trust your own emotions, how to set boundaries, how to say no without drowning in guilt. You realize that the reason you stayed so long wasn't because you were foolish. It was because you believed in love so deeply that you thought love alone could fix what was broken. You told yourself to be the bigger person, to be patient, to forgive one more time, to prove your love was strong enough to change someone. But the truth is, love can't heal someone who refuses to admit they're hurting others. And the more you tried to save them, the more you were being pulled under. Now that you're free from their manipulation, the most important thing isn't proving you're strong. It's learning to live without needing to prove anything at all. No more proving you were good enough. No more proving you weren't the problem. No more proving your love was real. You begin to live a life not centered around being understood, but centered around finally understanding yourself. At first, this might feel disorienting, because you've spent so long reading their moods, managing their chaos, anticipating their needs, and walking on emotional eggshells. Now that there's no one to fix you, come face to face with yourself, and it's unfamiliar. That's normal, because healing from emotional abuse is not a straight line. There are days you'll feel powerful, and days where one song, one familiar place, or one random memory can unravel you. But this time the difference is clear: you no longer want to go back. You may miss them, but you no longer want them in your life. You may grieve the good moments, but you no longer want to sacrifice your peace just to relive a memory. Because now you know real love never asks you to lose yourself to keep it. And any relationship that makes you feel small, afraid, constantly apologizing for your truth is not love. It's control. Now every day you choose awareness over confusion. You choose clarity over avoidance. You choose peace over chaos. You choose boundaries over guilt. You no longer live to be understood. You live to understand yourself. And most of all, you no longer define your worth through the eyes of the person who broke you. You begin to rebuild not into the person you were before them, but into someone deeper, truer, and stronger. Someone reborn through clarity, through courage, and through pain that was finally honored instead of hidden. This isn't just recovery. This is the homecoming to your true self. Freedom doesn't begin when you leave. Freedom begins the moment you realize you no longer want to go back. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you've realized that love cannot coexist with manipulation. Love cannot survive where there's consistent harm with zero accountability. Here's the truth. A narcissist never truly believes it's over. They don't believe in closure. In their mind, you are a supply source that might be distant now, but one they assume will eventually return as long as they push the right buttons. They might go silent for months, vanish completely, then suddenly reappear with a harmless-looking message. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. They may pretend they've changed, that they've matured, that they've learned, that they've healed. But you must understand, anyone who only learns after they've lost control was never really learning. They were adjusting tactics. Every time you go back, they don't see it as love. They see it as proof that they still have a hold on you, that they still matter, that next time they can push further, dig deeper, hurt sharper, because now they know you return. Keeping your freedom isn't just about physical distance. It's about protecting your mind from being re-entered. That means you don't need to respond. You don't need to post anything to send a message. You don't need to explain to mutual friends. You don't need to prove anything anymore. True freedom is when you no longer need their validation. You know you were honest. You know you loved fully. You know you were patient, forgiving, and loyal. And that is enough regardless of whether they ever acknowledge it. When you stop reacting to them, that's when their power truly ends. But also, ironically, that's when they become most desperate to reel you back in. And their desperation, it won't always look chaotic. It might look calm, spiritual, even peaceful. You must remember, Not everything that looks like healing is genuine. Someone who starts therapy just to convince you they've changed isn't healing. They're using therapy as a strategy to reopen the door. So you must ask yourself the most honest question of all. If I had never left, would they have changed at all? If the answer is no, then what you're witnessing now isn't growth. It's strategy. Don't fall into the trap of premature hope, because misplaced hope in the wrong person at the wrong time is just another form of self-destruction. You now have something you never had before: distance. And from that distance, you can finally see clearly how they twisted the narrative, how they made you feel guilty for having boundaries, how they convinced you that you couldn't live without them. But now you know you're still here. You're still breathing. You're still waking up every morning, going to work, eating, sleeping, healing. Maybe it still hurts. Maybe you still miss them, but you are surviving without them. And that is what terrifies them most, that you exist whole, strong, at peace, without needing them to play a single role in your story anymore. Freedom doesn't come from revenge. It doesn't come from their apology. It doesn't come from making them finally understand. Freedom comes when you no longer need anything from them. Not closure, not a final conversation, not a pretty ending. Just the quiet, steady choice every day to choose yourself. You don't have to go around explaining they're a narcissist. I was the victim. I tried everything I could. You don't have to say any of that, because once you truly understand the truth, you no longer need to prove it to anyone else. After escaping a toxic relationship, there's a familiar temptation, the desire to be understood. You want your friends, your family, your co-workers to see what really happened. You want them to know that you were manipulated, gaslit, torn down. But here's the hard truth. Not everyone will see what you've come to see. Narcissists are experts at keeping up appearances. They know exactly what to say. They know how to perform vulnerability, humility, even remorse. And if you try to expose them to people who have never experienced psychological abuse, you may be met with blank stares or worse, accusations that you're the bitter one, the dramatic one, the one who can't let go. And that will hurt. Not because you're wrong, but because you're trying to speak the truth into ears that were never tuned to hear it. That's when you must learn one of the most powerful lessons of healing. You don't need anyone to validate your reality in order for it to be real. You don't need their nods to know you're not crazy. You don't need their approval to know you were right to walk away. You just need to keep that truth alive in your silence, in your boundaries, in the life you now choose to live without them. Let your every decision speak louder than any argument. Let the way you carry yourself, the peace you protect, the people you surround yourself with, become your clearest answer. Stop participating in the games. You don't need to stay friends for appearances. You don't need to keep the peace just to avoid being judged. You don't need to pretend that the relationship wasn't as damaging as it really was. Choose clarity over comfort, because what you're protecting now isn't just your reputation, it's your soul. When you walk away from a manipulator, you enter a world where truth doesn't need to be performed. It just needs to be lived, breathed, reflected through what you no longer tolerate and who you no longer allow access to your life. And yes, there will be people who ask, "Why are you being so cold? Were they really that bad? They seemed fine to me." You'll be tempted to defend yourself, to tell the whole story, but instead you can simply say, "I saw enough, and I chose peace." Because some things don't need to be retold. Some chapters don't need to be reopened. Some truths only need to be embodied, and that's enough. Real healing doesn't come from convincing others you were a worthy victim. It comes from the quiet realization that you're no longer a victim at all. You're a survivor. You're the one who walked away. You're the one choosing yourself again every single day. You don't need to respond to every rumor. You don't need to chase down every twisted version of your story. You don't need to preserve your public image in someone else's narrative. You just need to keep living a life you don't have to justify. When you don't react, the narcissist loses their audience. When you don't defend, they lose the script. When you don't engage, they lose the stage. And in that loss of control, their performance begins to crumble, not because of anything you said, but because you simply stopped playing the part. You walked off the stage not in rage, not in revenge, but in rebirth. And that may be the most courageous thing you've ever done. Don't blame yourself for falling into a relationship with a narcissist. Don't beat yourself up for loving them, forgiving them, or staying longer than you should have. The truth is, you weren't naive, or weak, or blind. You were simply deeply empathetic. Maybe too empathetic. You're the kind of person who sees the best in others, even when they've never truly shown it to you. You believed that if you loved hard enough, if you were kind enough, patient enough, selfless enough, they would eventually understand and change. But no one taught you that love, when placed in the wrong hands, can be turned into a weapon against you. You loved with an open heart, and that's why it hurt. Not because you were foolish, but because you were real. Don't blame yourself for not seeing the red flags earlier. Narcissists don't walk into your life wearing warning signs. They arrive with charm, attentiveness, intense eye contact, and a sense of connection so fast it feels like fate. That wasn't love. That was technique. A calculated pattern designed to gain your trust, lower your boundaries, and make you open your soul. And once you did, they slowly began to manipulate you. They made you question your memory, your feelings, your instincts. They convinced you that you were the problem, that you were too sensitive, that you remembered wrong, that you expected too much. You started apologizing for your own emotions, and that is never where love is supposed to take you. If now looking back you're angry at yourself for not seeing it sooner, forgive yourself. Because you saw it the moment you were strong enough to face it. Most people can't wake up while they're still in the dream. It takes enough pain, enough gaslighting, enough betrayal for the truth to finally pierce through the fog. You didn't leave late. You left the moment your soul could no longer carry the lie. Don't blame yourself for not leaving earlier. You left when you had the strength to let go of something you once believed you couldn't live without. And no one else gets to define the timing of your healing. Not your friends, not your family, not society. Only you know what it took to say, enough. Don't blame yourself for going back so many times. Each time you returned, it wasn't stupidity, it was hope. Hope that things could change. Hope that the promises would finally come true. Hope that if you just gave a little more loved, a little harder, it would all be worth it. Now you know, love can't fix someone who has no intention of growing. And kindness, when given to the wrong person, isn't heroic, it becomes self-harm. So today, lay that burden down. Stop analyzing the past just to pick yourself apart. You weren't wrong to love. You weren't wrong to forgive. You weren't wrong to try. What you need now is not more self-criticism, but self-forgiveness. Not because you were wrong, but because you didn't yet know how to protect yourself better. Now you do. And knowing that is enough. Start thanking your past self, the version of you that tried to keep something beautiful alive, the one who stayed silent to avoid hurting others, the one who gave more than they received over and over, and above all, the one who finally chose to walk away when there was nothing left to hold on to. That was you, and you deserve your own respect. From this day forward, you don't have to carry shame. You get to carry compassion for yourself. You get to say, I did the best I could with what I knew, and now I know better. You don't need their apology. You just need to stop apologizing to yourself. And that is the first door to healing, to freedom, to coming home to the one person you've been waiting for all along, you. And so, when you finally see through them, everything begins to collapse, not your world, but the illusion they built around you. You no longer fall for their manipulation. You no longer react the way they expect. You go silent, not out of weakness, but because you've realized that reaction is their reward. You withdraw your emotions not because you're numb, but because you're protecting yourself. You no longer seek an apology. You're not waiting for them to understand you, because now you know they never truly tried to. The moment you see through them is the moment they start to panic, because their power only existed as long as you doubted yourself, as long as you needed their validation, as long as you held on to hope for something that was never real. But you've woken up. And awakening is the one thing a narcissist cannot control. They will try everything: rage, blame, fake remorse, playing the victim, spreading rumors, smearing your name. They will try to punish you for the crime of freedom, but you won't waver anymore, because now you know this is not truth. It's just their survival system falling apart in desperation. And you no longer need to explain yourself to anyone. You don't need to prove you were the victim. You don't need to convince your friends, family, or colleagues, I wasn't the one who caused this. You just have to live with integrity. Let your actions speak for you. You don't have to play their game anymore. What you once called love, now you understand it was emotional dependency, disguised manipulation, hunger, satisfied by hurt. Now you call it by its name. And when you name the darkness, it loses its grip. You are not heartless for walking away. You are not ungrateful for no longer trying to save them. You are someone who chose truth over fantasy, peace over performance, freedom over emotional chains. Your silence, your distance, your non-reaction. Those are signs that you've taken back your power. They will never admit it. They will never say you were right. But you don't need them to. You don't need recognition from the person who hurt you. You've already given that to yourself, and that's the kind of power no one can take. And one day you'll wake up and realize you're not thinking about them anymore. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because you've healed. You'll look back at that time like a nightmare that's finally over. No bitterness, no rage, just silence and a lesson. You'll meet someone new, maybe a friend, a new love, or maybe just your own reflection, and you won't flinch at the past anymore. You walked through the darkness. You survived. And more importantly, you came back to life. No one could have taught you this better than your own experience, and now you carry something few people have. You saw through the lie and chose the light. If you're still here watching until this final moment, then you are living proof of that. You are no longer who they could control. You are the one who defines who you are. And that is what they fear the most.